Well, welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see a couple people join in for this conversation. My name is Justine Johnson. I'm the Associate Director of Kirkridge Retreat and Study Center in Bangor, Pennsylvania. And keeping with our mission and a couple days ahead of Ramadan, I've pondered how we can be in our work interfaith and continue to learn and strengthen our own understandings of the world, including spiritual life. So I reached out to our lovely board member, Farina, in this invitation in a way of honoring her and all of her strengths that she brings to Kirkridge as well. And she invited someone else, and so we're growing our network and learning from each other. And I'm hoping, Farina, you can speak to a little bit about your role on the board and the values that this brings out in Kirkridge.
Thank you, Justine. I've been on the board, I think coming up to 2.5, 3 years now, and it is the Kirkridge board and the place itself, the programming, everything it represents. It's been one of the most welcoming places that I've ever been, had the privilege of being part of. I believe I'm one of the only Muslim or the only Muslim on the board, and I never feel like an outsider or anything of that sort. It's been such an honor and a pleasure, and I've learned so much from all of you. So, it just seems so appropriate that you would have this idea to get to know a major event in the Muslim calendar. Imam Omer or Chaplain Omer can talk to us a little bit about a little bit about the demographics of the American Muslim communities, and it's quite a significant communities. But before we do that, I just want to say, Omer, you've visited Kirkridge during one of our board meetings, and you spoke with us in a way that I know after I spoke to our board members, that it just blew us away. You had such an economy of words when you went through some of the issues that were on your mind last year when you visited, to do with young people, to do with interfaith, to do with community, community cohesion. So I'm really, you are no stranger to Kirkridge, and Yale is no stranger to Kirkridge. Yale and Kirkridge have a deep and long history that I hope that we can write more about in association with this video that that everyone's going to be able to watch. But just a little bit about Omer. He's been at Yale for 12 years as the director of Muslim life. I arrived at Yale as part of my family's move here about 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. And I have seen the way that what an integral part Omer is for Yale campus life, not just for the Muslim students here, but in the way that Omer communicates and builds community with other parts of the Yale community, other faith groups, other, whether it's cultural groups or just people who need a listening ear and someone to talk through the many issues that people on campus face, whether it's faculty or students. And you are a really important part of this, and I just could not think of anyone better to do this Ramadan 101 for folks who are at Kirkridge and folks who are going to be watching from afar, given the situation that we find ourselves in. So Omer, before I take more time, please tell us what you're going to present today, and give us a bit of a background and why you developed this presentation, because I understand you've developed it and presented it a few times now.
Well, Bismillah, in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Thank you so much to Justine and to Farina and to all of the Kirkridge, board and everyone that's affiliated with it. This is a great pleasure and privilege, and I had a wonderful time when I visited 2 years ago, and really felt the warmth and the hospitality in welcoming me. And I'm deeply flattered and humbled by your words. Thank you. And I'm very privileged to be a part of this conversation with you. To just get into it, to answer your question and then to the presentation, a huge integral part of my work interfaith engagement and being the interfaith interlocutor, right, or the multi-faith interlocutor for on behalf of the Muslim community on and off campus, so beyond campus. So a lot of my work actually takes me off campus into local synagogues and churches and whatnot. And so years ago, I forget actually when I originally developed this. It's been a sort of a evolving process. That I would always get questions about Ramadan. I love talking about Ramadan. I'm being very honest. Ramadan is my favorite time of the year, and it's a challenging time of the year, and we're going to talk about that. And so I also really believe in the power of visuals and in narrative, in storytelling. And so what this came out of was really sort of a synthesizing of the two. Is I have a beautiful sort of gallery of images that I'm going to share with you momentarily, and then stories behind that, right? Sort of that go into what I call the inner outer dimensions of Ramadan from an insider perspective as a Muslim, but how it can really teach us some sort of spiritual values in our world today, and maybe especially, right, with the global pandemic that we're facing right now. And I'm going to touch on that as well. So this really emerged out of my interfaith engagement work, where people were always curious and fascinated by what Ramadan meant for, 1.5 billion plus people around the world. And so that's where this comes out of. Thank you. Shall I go ahead and start? Okay, thank you. So my email is there, and I always put that on the title slide. So anyone that has any follow-up questions, please feel free. I make myself fully available and accessible to you. Reach out to me with any questions or concerns. To get right into it, I've titled this Inner and Outer Dimensions of Ramadan, and I'm going to, you can follow along here. I always love to start with statistics. I want to set the big picture. So this is the data to the best of my ability that I've gathered, right? And I will narrate these pictures in just a moment. Generally speaking, about 1 out of every 4 people, so almost a quarter, right, to 1 out of 5, depending on how you look at the data, people around the world identifies as Muslim. And so, this research is from Pew, which is a very reputable global research organization, taken from 2017. The numbers have only gone up. I don't think they've gone down, just because of birth rates and other factors. But you have about 1.7, 1.8, 1.9. It all depends on how you, which way you look at the numbers, Muslims around the world. So I said it comes out to a little under a quarter of a global population of 7.7 billion and increasing. And so the takeaway for this slide that I want you to sort of remember is that 20% of the Muslims live in countries where Muslims are a minority, right? And I myself am a part of that minority statistic, right? Although I was born in Pakistan, I migrated when I was a baby here, and I've spent the vast majority of my life in the United States. So I consider myself an American Muslim, someone who's American in their cultural outlook and sort of many of the shared cultural and social values, but comes from a spiritual and religious tradition, right, from within Islam. And so I wanted to share 3 pictures here that speak to this reality. The picture in the middle of the page is actually of an ancient mosque in India. And this is of the Eid prayer. It's one of the festival prayers. And I'm going to talk about that towards the end of the presentation. But I just bookmarked that for you now. India has over 1 billion people. And there are 200 million Muslims in India. So they are a significant minority population and one of the world's largest Muslim populations who are still like a minority within a very multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious society like India. And have been there for well over 1,000 years. If you go below that, you see a picture of in China. These are the Uyghur Muslims. They're an ethnic Muslim minority in the Zhejiang, in one of the western provinces of China, that have also been there for well over 1,000 years. And sadly, they are persecuted, and this has been well documented by human rights organizations around the world, that is now coming to light. But I mention that to say that these people they're ethnically Chinese, right? They speak the Chinese language, but they've been Muslim. They have connections to Central Asia in their ancestry. And so Islam, again, China is the world's largest country, right? That you have there's estimates between 30 to 40 to 50 million Muslims, right, that live in China, which when we think of China, like the Muslim community isn't really in our mental frame. And so I highlight that. And then the picture on the left of that is a picture taken from a street in Western Europe. And this is just juxtaposition, excuse me. There's a lingerie ad in the back, and then you see a Muslim woman walking in the hijab, in the traditional head covering. And I say that to highlight that there are millions of Muslims in France, in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Germany, tens of millions of Muslims that are now 2nd and 3rd generation. They've grown up speaking French, speaking Spanish, speaking Italian, speaking German as first languages, but they identify as Muslim, and they are part of this population of 20% of the global Muslim community live as minorities. And so that's what I think, in my mind, what makes a presentation like this even more apropos is that we're talking about our neighbors, right? This isn't just what was the Orientalist conception of the Muslim world as the East, right? There was sort of Western Europe and Western Christendom, and then sort of the Oriental Muslim East. These Muslims are part and parcel of our day-to-day lives. And we'll talk about that a little further. But also, I want to share this picture. When you talk about the global Muslim community, while Islam is a global community and a global faith, it is still largely, right, demographically speaking, centered around this band that you see here, all throughout North Africa, the traditional Middle East, and into parts of Central Asia. And so you see here, which I think is an pretty accurate representation of the global distribution. The takeaway for this slide, and the topic of today is not to go into Sunni Shia differences, that's maybe another conversation for another time, is just to give you a pictorial representation. 85 to 90%, depending on what demographics you follow, of the Muslim world identify as Sunni. And that's the light green. So you see the vast majority of the Muslim world identifies as Sunni. And the Shia are a minority, but they're a significant minority of tens of millions, right? In fact, I would say hundreds of millions. About 15% of to 10% of the global Muslim community identify as Shia. So this is a significant voice. And a separate conversation for another time is the chaos and the fragility of the world that we live in right now is when you talk about intra-religious, communal, sectarian politics and geopolitics, right? That's another conversation, but I just put that out there to just sort of, so we have a baseline. Now, the beautiful part about my presentation is that what I believe is that both Sunnis and Shias have no disagreement on Ramadan, right? What I'm going to talk about is sort of universally applicable across the Muslim world. And now to get right into it, you know, just some basic facts about Ramadan. Muslims follow a lunar calendar, and a lunar calendar is essentially based on the phases of the moon, as opposed to we in the West follow a Gregorian solar calendar. A solar calendar is 365 days. A lunar calendar, a pure lunar calendar, is 354 days. So that's important because you lose 10, quote unquote, lose 10 or 11 days every year, because if we start from January 1st to December 31st on a solar calendar, a lunar calendar is by definition shorter. So every year, imagine the clock is moving like this, the calendar clock. So you lose these days, and so Ramadan, over a 30-year plus cycle, will come do a full cycle around the world, right? And that's just an interesting tidbit. Judaism also follows a lunar calendar, but it's a corrected lunar calendar. For ancient rabbinic reasons, they've affixed certain festivals to certain harvest seasons and times of the year. That's why you always find Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah falling within the early fall. You find Passover falling in the spring. You find Hanukkah falling in the winter months. But they also do follow a lunar calendar. Now, essentially, what is a fast? Sort of, we're going to start off presuming no prior knowledge. In the idea of Ramadan for a Muslim is that they're doing a daily fast from dawn until sunset. And you have to abstain from three primary things: no eating, no drinking, and no sexual or conjugal relations. And there's a philosophy behind that, which I'm going to get to in just a moment. A couple of other facts. Now, this is the point being, this is one of the major pillars of Islam. An observant, practicing, self-identified Muslim would be expected from a religious and spiritual point of view to participate and follow the Ramadan fast. Now, Muslims are like everyone else. You have people, it's a sliding scale. You have people that are exceptionally observant. You have people that are sort of making their way, figuring it out. And, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And you have people on the other end of the quote unquote spectrum that are less so. It comes the same with prayer, with fasting, and all of that. I will say, just observationally, from my work as a chaplain, as well as just a member of the American Muslim community, I would say more people fast than they do pray. And there's a reason behind that. I have a theory, I should say, that I have a theory of the reason behind that. A prayer, 5 daily prayers, for some people is seen as a onerous and challenging, given our contemporary lifestyles and where people are in their personal faith and spiritual journeys. And so what I say is that, Muslims are like Jewish people and Christians and Buddhists and people who have other spiritual and religious disciplines. The whole community, right, is a spectrum of sort of the human experience. But with fasting, because fasting comes once a year, and fasting ends up becoming a very communal experience, right? Where if you live in a Muslim country, everyone's fasting. Like literally the days and nights shift in how society is structured, how businesses and schools and shopping centers are structured. So you can be a Muslim in a Muslim country and you'll have half days or you won't have school, or businesses will only be open until noon, and then everyone goes home and takes a siesta. And then in the evening, you go to your neighbors' houses and your friends and to the mosque and you eat together. And I'm gonna show you pictures of that in a minute. And then the shopping centers and restaurants are open all night because at night you can fast. So it's just easier to sort of onboard into that, right, in a Muslim community. Now, as an American Muslim, there's a challenge. I started fasting when I was in high school. My brother and I were athletes in high school. He played tennis and wrestled. I wrestled and played soccer. And I tried to keep up with my academics. And so do you learn as an American Muslim, as a minority, like how can I have a attempt at a devout spiritual life of practice, but also just, everyone wants to be normal and accepted, right? Be a normal teenager, normal high school student, or normal college student. And that's how you learn, right? To navigate these kinds of things. But as I was talking about, there's a default assumption. But Islamic law is obviously very understanding and has its own internal mechanisms of sophistication built in. And so there are exempt categories, and you see them posted on the screen. If you're sick, elderly, if you're a traveler, women who are menstruating, pregnant, or nursing, are all exempt from fast, right? Exempt from fasting. Children are expected to start fasting and praying from puberty, although many kids start earlier. And I'll just mention this because Ramadan is in fact starting tomorrow globally on Friday, April 24th this year. And so I've been following in my social media feed on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. There's, I have a 9-year-old daughter who's very excited. I mean, she has no expectation to fast, but she wants to fast because her friends are fasting, right? And so I don't expect her all to fast every day, but on the weekends maybe, right? And my 6-year-old son wants to fast. And so we'll do a fast from breakfast until lunch, right? And then we'll have a little lunch in there. And then we'll see if we can fast, if he wants to, from lunch until dinner, until we break our fast. Anyhow, I just weave these kind of anecdotal threads in to give you a texture of what, the life of a Muslim single person, family member, community member would be like. Now, fasting has many sort of purposes and ideas behind it. But one of the things I'll mention now, and then I'm going to give you a proof text, sort of a citation from the Quran where we draw this from, is fasting teaches an idea of piety, of discipline, and self-purification. And the real macro level philosophical idea is here. By cutting ourselves off from worldly comforts, literally the worldly comforts of food, of drink, of intimacy, for a prescribed time, right? From in the daylight hours, from dawn until sunset, for a short time. This helps one, we believe, by reorienting or reattuning the idea. I mean, we're biological creatures with basic biological needs, but we understand that everything that we have, the wealth, the health, the prosperity, all of that we have in life is a gift from God. And that by a physical discipline and control, it leads to a sense of a spiritual and mental acuity and enlightenment that comes in, right? And that you focus on your purpose on life by constantly being aware of the presence of God. I just share a picture with you here, and then I'm going to show you the verse that I wanted to cite. This is a picture of what in many parts of the Muslim world, and I'm going to show you more in a second. This was when I went on my pilgrimage trip many years ago, and this is what in many parts of the Muslim world you would have sort of traditional, right, fast breaking. You'd be sitting together, with family, with friends, and they serve you the food, and you're all eating communally. And this is a theme you're going to see throughout. Now, this is what I want to talk about. This is the famous verse from the Quran, chapter 2, verse 183. You see the citation there. I have the original Arabic, and I offer you a translation. I'm going to spend a minute unpacking the translation. And it starts, "O you who believe," so it's addressing, a Muslim here. "Fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, so that you may be mindful of God." Now, there's two things that I want to draw your attention to in this verse. The first is, when the Muslims believe, the Quran is divine scripture, this is God speaking, God is saying, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you. And what's important in that reading of that portion of the verse is this, that Muslims believe fasting is not unique to Islam. In fact, fasting is an ancient, primordial spiritual practice that you find thousands of years ago in Buddhist texts, in Christian texts, in Jewish texts, in Hindu texts. And so this is the thing, all of the great spiritual and religious traditions throughout history, right, from the Muslim point of view, recognize the power of a physical fast and what that leads to a sense of mental acuity, right, as well as spiritual awareness and spiritual consciousness. And so that takes us to the second part of the verse. The end of the verse is, so God is telling us, I've prescribed this for you like I gave it to previous communities, right, and nations that came before you, so that you may be mindful of me, may be mindful of God. Develop this idea of God consciousness, this awareness of the presence of God, that my existence is a gift from the Almighty, the existence of my loved ones, the environment that I live in, the people that I live in, that I'm in community with, everything around me is a creation of God, has sanctity, has dignity, and that fasting allows me, one of its many features is that I'm mindful of, right, and conscious of the presence of God in my life. And as this relates to how I economically engage, environmentally engage, interpersonally engage, spiritually engage with the world, being mindful of the presence of God. And on the right-hand side, this is a graphic that I took off the internet, and I find it's interesting. I think one can spend a lot of time unpacking this, but I use it as a visual poster to say this, right? Someone made this, I don't know who made it, I found it. They sort of, maybe in a cheeky way, called it the Ramadan highway code. So it's like these sort of, like green light, red light things. So fasting is now, what are you not supposed to do and what are you supposed to do? So if you go through it really quickly, no eating or drinking while fasting, lowering your gaze, the idea there that the eyes are the portal to the heart. This is sort of Islamic spirituality and mysticism, that the eyes, what you consume, not just physically, not just water, food, and drink, right? But what I consume through what I observe in my eyes has an effect on my spiritual and emotional and mental state, right? No arguing, avoid, repair broken interpersonal relationships and don't damage interpersonal relationships, right? No swearing, lying, backbiting, because the tongue was a gift from God that God gave to humanity to be able to articulate the beauty through poetry and song and all of these things, right, is to understand, to build, be in community and to connect with the divine and connect with our fellow human beings. And the tongue is a gift from God to elevate, not to denigrate, right? Not to swear, lie, or backbite. And then there's other things, don't smoke or drink. I mean, all these are negatively harmful. And then what are you supposed to do? Observant Muslim is called to and encouraged to pray 5 times a day, read the Quran. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Do lots of dhikr, do remembrance of God, make lots of prayer, be charitable. So anyway, just to give you, this is what you might find on a Muslim Facebook page or something like that. But now to get right into it, in the interest of time, I'm going to try to keep moving. So there's a word in Arabic called istiqbal, and I mention this because the word literally means to welcome. And it's used in Islamic texts for a variety of things, but it's particularly used in this context for welcoming Ramadan. The way the Muslim community sees it is that this is the holiest time of the year. It's the most sacred, auspicious time of the year. And the way that you would welcome a beloved family member, a elder, a teacher, someone that's very close to you, you would beautify and prepare and adorn your house. Right, you would prepare the best of food. You would tell your children and your loved ones is that we're getting a very special guest today, and that's the idea, the sort of the ethos that you find throughout the Muslim world with people that literally, as I speak tonight, right, are preparing for tomorrow being in Ramadan. And this is not different. Like what I say is that Ramadan is the Muslim modality of fasting. You find fasting in other traditions, but furthermore, it's not just like, we just finished the blessed season of Easter, right, for our Christian brothers and sisters. And then before that, we had the season of Passover for our Jewish brothers and sisters. And so the idea there is that you demarcate sacred times of the year that are holy time, right? And so this idea of you're welcoming this, of going into the Shabbat time, right? Going into the season of Lent, going into Easter. And so for Muslims, this is analogous to the welcoming of Ramadan. So I just shared these beautiful pictures. I spent a month in Jerusalem, in Israel, Palestine, and these are pictures taken from the old city there, wandering around the streets of the old city. And so lanterns are a very iconic Muslim image, because the idea there, that goes back to sort of ancient Middle Eastern culture. A lantern, literally illuminates, right? It drives away the darkness. And I think this is also applicable to many religious and spiritual traditions. But in Ramadan, because Ramadan, it's very much about light and darkness. The daylight when you're fasting, and the evening when you break your fast. So the lantern is a very common image. The other thing that I want to mention is that the Quran is really central to an idea of understanding Ramadan. This is a verse that we talked about, verse 183 from chapter number 2. This is verse 185, so 2 verses later. The end of that verse is right there, the month of Ramadan in which the Quran was revealed. Muslims believe that God sent to the angel Gabriel the Quran. Oh, actually, no, Muslims believe that God sent through the angel Gabriel divine scripture to all of his beloved individuals in society. So throughout human history. So Abraham was given the scripture. David was given the Psalms. Moses was given the Torah, right? And Jesus was given the Gospels, the New Testament. And so the Quran is what Gabriel delivered to the Prophet Muhammad. Muslims believe that it happened in the month of Ramadan. And so there is a very deep connection between reciting or listening to and studying the Quran. I mean, ideally throughout the year, but realistically, most of us, myself first and foremost, sadly, take it off the bookshelf in Ramadan. I dust it off, and I need to now reorient, reconnect, recalibrate my heart with scripture. And so that's why you find so much, and we're going to talk about this in just a minute, but I just love this picture of someone sitting down in a mosque and spending time with the Quran, which you see there in front. Now, one of the other things that I talk about, oops, sorry about that, is, what many people, I'm a foodie, I'm an unabashed foodie. I think that food is one of the many gifts of God to human civilization, to humanity, I would say. I've been very blessed and privileged. I've traveled through so much of the world, through Europe, through Asia, and to Southeast Asia. And I love trying different foods. And the reason I mention this is that in Ramadan, people are fasting all day, 16 hours, 17 hours in the summer months in the northern hemisphere these days. And so what you're really looking to, because we're human beings at the end of the day, right? You're really looking forward to like a delicious, nutritious, sumptuous, oftentimes comfort food kind of meal at the end of the day, right? And there's a lot that's been spoken about that. So in Muslim communities is that people prepare, really amazing dishes to share, not just with their family, but with their neighbors, with their friends, with their mosque and beyond. And so people always ask me, what is like the iconic, prototypical Muslim meal? And what I say is like I said before, we have 1.8 billion Muslims. There is no way I can answer that question and say, what would be the Muslim meal? Now, I'm South Asian. I grew up literally eating South Asian food from my mom, which I think is an amazing cook. But I also love many different kinds of cuisine. But if I had to pick one thing, ubiquitous item that you would find on every table across 1.8 billion Muslims, table spreads, it would be this. It would be dates, right? So I've been, hyping this up, and I'll tell you why. There's two reasons that you'll find that. One is dates are, an ancient food. They're found in previous scriptures as well. You find a lot of ancient Near Eastern texts in Judaism and Christianity that talk about dates and figs and pomegranates, right? And I understand that I'm speaking to an audience that has more expertise on many of these things than I do myself. And dates are a very healthy, nutritious item. And so the Prophet Muhammad, we Muslims aspire to follow his example. The Prophet, he said this in the narration, he said, I love to open my fast with dates and water. That these have become sort of symbolic throughout the Muslim world, is that you have all the amazing kebabs and biryani and samosas and whatever else, right, based on the cuisine, but you'll always have dates and water at the center of the table that everyone will open their fast with. And then when you do interfaith iftars, people always ask, what should we prepare? What should we cook? I said, you bring whatever you want to bring, whatever you would love to share. I'm not there to dictate it for you, but expect to find dates on the table, right, that everyone is going to share. Because in traditional societies, dates were a symbol of hospitality, of rest and peace. So the stories of Abraham, when he welcomed, Abraham in the desert, in the tent of Abraham, is that when he would get visitors, that he would serve them dates, right? It was just it's also very portable. I mean, there's a lot of fascinating things about dates. It's densely packed nutrition. It's also, you can dry it out and it becomes a very portable sort of food, and it comes for us out of a prophetic tradition. So I have pictures here, dates growing fresh on palm trees. And I've actually been blessed to go to date orchards and see how they farm and cultivate dates. And then you see a picture here. And there are like dozens of varieties of dates. I got a whole lesson on dates from the date farm, which is fascinating. And actually, I'll make a quick just segue here. And I'm being mindful of time, I'm trying, is there in the Quran, there is a verse, which I don't remember the reference right now, but it's chapter 19. It's called the verse of Mary. And in it, it says that when Mary was pregnant, was given the glad tidings of the pregnancy, of the baby Jesus. And she was in the temple. She was Muslim narrative is in many ways like that way, congruent with the biblical narrative, is that she was for food. There were dates that there was a date palm tree that she shook and then the dates fell down. So that date, according to Muslim sources, is called rutab. That's the name of that type of date. And years ago when I went to the date farm, and I try to take back my students when I go back, on the pilgrimage, is we actually found those dates. They brought it to us and said, these are the dates. And in fact, the farmer was telling us that this is the date that in Muslim narrative, this is the date that, the Virgin Mary, peace be upon her, ate. And I was like amazed. So I have a picture of it on my Instagram, just as a random aside. But moving on in the interest of time. So I want to share pictures with you. Now we're going to shift from sort of the didactic portion to just a lot of pictures and some more stories, right? These are not all my pictures. I've curated these and culled these from just the internet on a lot of photo essays and whatnot. So I don't want to take credit for work that's not my own. But just a couple of things. At the bottom, you see, these are all prophetic narrations, right? These are all teachings of the prophet. So he said, whoever feeds the person who is breaking this fast, he will have his reward for his fasting without decreasing anything from the reward of the fasting person. So in this month, you find people, Muslims, being exceptionally generous, right? And donations go skyrocket, where acting on this prophetic injunction, right, or piece of advice, is that people say, I want to get the benefit of I want to please God and get the benefit of feeding the hungry, right? One of the sort of philosophies behind fasting, like we already talked about God consciousness and awareness and mindfulness. One of the other things that's written in the text, I didn't give you the text right now, but I'll mention it, is we go hungry so that we feel at a literally visceral, physical level in your stomach what hunger feels like. That's actually part of the philosophy of Islam, is that I may live, and I do live, an incredibly comfortable and privileged life, but I need to remind myself and never take for granted the blessing of food and the blessing of people who prepare my food, my food from when it's planted to when it's harvested to when it's shipped to when I buy it. It's a reminder of that chain, right? That food chain in society, right? In which we want to improve, because so many of these people are too sadly the marginalized, right, and neglected portions of our society. That's another conversation. But to remind myself of what it feels like to be hungry for 16, 17 hours, intentionally out of my own volition, and then to be able to savor when I am given food. So I share these two pictures with you. The picture on the right is from Indonesia. You can see it's pretty self-explanatory. Indonesia is the world's largest Muslim country. It has well over 200 million Muslims that live over 300 million Muslims that live there. You see, this is how, for many people, this is their major caloric intake for the day, right? They're coming with like plastic and metal buckets to scoop out cauldrons, right? To feed like a village, to feed a sector of society. And on the left, you see here, these are mosques right before the sunset, that people are setting out all these trays of food for anyone. Literally anyone can walk in off the street and just grab a plate of food to eat. And this is all through private philanthropy, right? People are donating to all of these things, and organizations are preparing the food. Just another picture here. There's a text at the bottom. The Prophet was the most generous of people. He was even more generous in Ramadan when Gabriel would visit him and review the Quran with him. You can read on. I share these two pictures right now. My family's originally from Pakistan. My father's a physician. He went to medical school. He served for 4 years in the military as a military surgeon. And it was right before the Afghan-Soviet war happened, and there was an influx of millions of refugees from Afghanistan into northern Pakistan. And these are the refugee camps that 30 years later, 40 years later are still there, right? And the disaster that's been the last 20 years of the Afghanistan and just on and on. This is the plight of so many people. And so I share these pictures, is that, look at that Afghan girl on the side, like that is probably her caloric intake for days, right? And I mean, we find this throughout the world. I'm in no way privileging a particular trauma or pain here, only because I have family connections. I have students that are Afghan refugees. We work with the local refugee resettlement from Syria, from Yemen, from Somalia. And so these pictures, I mean, these are like sort of universal pictures in that sense. And then I just want to end, and we're going to transition here. Someone asked the Prophet, what's the best thing in Islam? What's the most virtuous deed that I can do? And the Prophet is reported to have said, feeding others and giving the greeting of salam, of peace, to those whom you know and those whom you don't know. And so the two pictures here, this is a picture on the left from Pakistan. These are people praying right before they open their fast. And the picture on the right, one of my beloved teachers and spiritual mentors is from Turkey. And I did Ramadan in Turkey one year. And I spent it visiting with him and just being in Istanbul. I love Istanbul. If you ever get a chance to go, it is a phenomenal city. And yes, thank you. And the Turkish cuisine in my mind is like, out of this world. And so what's really cool there is you have public parks with, like, you can see hundreds and hundreds of people, right? That are just sitting down, breaking their fast. They're like these big picnics for hundreds and thousands of people, right? In the thing. So if you're on your way home from work and you're not going to get home to your family, you can just like, hop off the train and just go grab this in a public marketplace or public park and grab a free meal and then, go on your way. Sorry. And then going on. And I want to end with this. This is my hometown. This is the city of my birth. It's called Lahore. It's an old city. Goes back, over 2,000 years. And so this is the famous iconic mosque there called the Bajwa Mosque. And this is a family having iftar. They're having their fast-breaking meal at sunset. And so this is a quote from the Prophet. The best of you are the best of their families, and I'm the best of my family. And Ramadan is really about family time. And I think given the reality where we are in a global pandemic, where we're all in self-isolation and quarantine, ideally with loved ones in safe environments. And I understand that's not the case for everybody, but for some of us it is that really this is the time. And I've been preaching this to my students, is that, God is infinite wisdom has sent us this, and there's lessons to learn out of it. That's a deeper conversation for another time. One of which is, if God has blessed you with loved ones and family and roommates that you're with, use this time, especially this time, for service. Look after their physical needs, their emotional needs, their mental needs, their spiritual needs, right? We're all in need of this. The levels of anxiety and frustration and sadness and loss and grief that we're finding cutting across the entire world, is noteworthy right now. And so it's a spiritual lesson, I think, for all of us, that we can all benefit from. Really quick picture, some pictures of mosques, because we talked about Islam being a global community. The picture from the right, that's a picture from the Beijing Mosque. It's like 700 years old, which I think is fascinating. One of the really cool things that I love about this mosque, I've never been there, right? My friend went and told me all about it, is that two things. It's built in a traditional Chinese architectural style, which I love, because what it is that this mosque is like 700-800 years old. So it was built long before, right, our time. But what it did was, it was Muslim, architects and community members looking into the indigenous local community, and reflecting the beauty of the indigenous architecture. Like, this is how traditional houses of worship, have been built for centuries in China. And so you see the traditional architecture. Red is a very auspicious and powerful color in Chinese philosophy, right? And so you find all of the elements of this in there. I love that. I would hope and pray someday to go visit. And the mosque on the left is one of the mosques from India. Just again, this iconic sort of picture. Now, one of the other things that you find in Ramadan is that this is a verse from the Quran, and your Lord says, call on me and I will answer you. Like, pray to me, supplicate to me, and I'll hear. We believe that God hears the prayers and supplications of every sincere heart that calls upon him. Every broken-hearted person, everyone that's in distress, anyone that's in any sort of anguish, mental anguish, physical anguish, spiritual anguish, right? God is all hearing and all seeing from the Muslim perspective. And so Ramadan, what you find is that this is like the most spiritually powerful time of the year for us. And this is a very common scene, right? And I grew up this looks like my grandfather, who I was blessed to spend time with when I was a teenager. He passed away when I was in college. But this is like, I see those gray beards and faces of devotion and piety. And it goes directly to my grandfather, who had in my mind, because he had such a profound influence on me when I came into my spiritual identity as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, when I was transitioning from high school to college. And then, this is a picture taken in Iran of a woman having a very deeply powerful, intimate moment of talking to God, of pouring your heart out to God. And God knows, right, to use the idiomatic expression, with everything going on in the world right now, with 25 million people in our country that are unemployed, and just the levels of devastation that are happening economically, physically, emotionally, right, to our society. I have 5 physicians in my immediate family, right, that are on the front lines. And I'm sure you know people, and I'm sure we all have some connection to this. People that are sick, or people that are helping save lives, or people who are just stressed out beyond their means, right, on what's going to happen with this global pandemic. And so that's what I say is, when we say Ramadan doesn't just come for the 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, from my sort of metaphysical understanding, the blessings of Ramadan come to all of God's creation, right? To all 7.7 billion souls in the world, and to the fish in the ocean and the birds in the sky, right? And to all the vegetation that you find, that at a metaphysical, spiritual dimension, that I believe things are happening. I mean, things have been happening, right? Where we've just been coming out of blessed seasons. But from my perspective as a Muslim, that things are going to start happening as well, right? Additional things, I should say. And so this is the time, this is the season, right? To call upon God and reconnect with God. That's basically the message of Ramadan. One of the things that happens, and I'm looking at the time and I'm getting close to the end, is you just have this fatigue, right? I love these pictures. You have this fatigue because when you're like, getting up and fasting, you're eating, at 4 a.m. before sunrise. The sunrise comes up here in New Haven at like 4:40 a.m. And then, dawn does, excuse me. And then, your sunset tonight is at like 7:30 or 7:42. I only know this because I printed the schedule off last night to get ready for tomorrow. Okay. And so that's a lot of hours of fasting. And so what happens is naturally you're going to get tired, you get fatigued. And so, what I call a pro tip that I tell my family and my community is you have to learn how to take a power nap in the middle of the day, in the afternoon. And in fact, there's all sorts of fascinating things written on how the idea of a siesta, which we have, actually comes from the ancient Near East, because people that lived traditionally in very hot climates, from noon until afternoon was the hottest part of the day. And that's when people would shut down businesses and would literally go in and to cool off and take a nap. So that's what I find, a power nap after, midday, really. And so you see, this gentleman sleeping in the mosque, you see a young boy here sleeping on the floor, just to give a human dimension to it. Now, getting towards the end, the other really important, I've spent a lot of time talking about food, as you can tell, I'm a foodie, and everything related to that. But the other unique dimension of Ramadan, or the unique expression, I should say, is you have these communal nightly prayers that are special in Ramadan. They don't happen, we have night prayers generally, but these night prayers are special because if you remember before, I talked about how Ramadan is connected to the Quran. So what happens is if you divide the Quran into 30 portions, every night in a mosque, normally, the Imam would recite 1/30 of the Quran. So you'd start, part 1 on day 1, part 2, part 3. So over the course of the 30 days of 1 month, you from start to finish going through an entire recitation of the Quran, right? Similar in some traditions to a lectionary, right? That you do a cycle within 1 month. On average, it takes about, depending on the speed of the reciter, about 90 minutes from start to finish when you're reciting. And there's, you're praying, you're standing, you're bowing, you're prostrating. So this is a picture from Indonesia. I look at this and I'm just like, wow. I mean, that's like, that's like a mega mosque. I've never been to a mosque that big. I mean, I've been to Mecca, the Grand Mosque, but that's unique in its own right. And then I share this picture. This is the women's section, women praying there. And it's just so phenomenal. Like just the, people, and I don't say that, I don't want to mean this in any way judgmentally. There's those of us who struggle to go to the mosque to pray regularly throughout the other 11 months of the year. But really what happens in Ramadan is we believe God's mercy is descending, and it's just easier to be a good person. There's actually a saying of the Prophet that the gates of heaven are open and the devil and his minions are locked up in the month of Ramadan. So God makes it easier for you to do good and actually makes it harder for you to do bad, right? And so it's easier to go to the mosque and to give charitably and to feed people, to pray for people, to serve people. And in this day and age, we all need to be looking out for each other, right? Is getting groceries and mowing people's lawns for my elderly neighbors and people that need help because they're susceptible and immunocompromised. And I just want to share these two pictures. This is a picture that cracks me up. The picture on the left is actually from Paris, from a mosque in Paris, France. And I have young kids. I know my kids were that age. They did that as well. But I love that because it means that they feel comfortable in the house of God, in a house of God, of the many houses of God that there are. I'd rather them feel comfortable in the house of God than being shooed away and being, you don't belong here. Now obviously there's decorum to every place, but these are heartwarming pictures for me. And then towards the end of Ramadan, you have this thing called the Night of Power. So Muslims believe that the most blessed night of the entire year is in the last 10 days of Ramadan. And we don't know the exact date, but we believe it's on the last odd night. So the 21st, the 23rd, the 25th, the 27th, the 29th of Ramadan is when the Prophet encouraged us to look for the night of power. And you're supposed to stay awake as long as you can. You pray, you give charitably, you read the Quran, you use your prayer beads to do a litany and to remember the names of God and to worship God and to praise Him. And so this is just a picture of over a very famous mosque this is from Egypt actually, and then so now we're at the end of Ramadan. So Ramadan is ended, right? We've gone through 30 months of discipline, of sacrifice, of trying to be a better human being, of watching, not arguing with people, not cussing people out, not using profanity, not consuming things not looking at things you're not supposed to. Really, you've been on this spiritual journey. How can I be a better person? I need to work on my relationship with my parents and my children and my siblings and my coworkers and my neighbors. Am I jealous? Am I arrogant? Am I conceited? Am I miserly? Why do I just feel so angry all the time? Like, don't I want to be a better person? Like, if I met myself, would I like myself? Would I like the person I want to be? Those are the kind of questions, that we're all sort of pondering in different moments of our life. Perhaps in Ramadan, you're really supposed to dig deep on those questions. So now we believe you've worked hard for a year, and then after you've always worked hard, you study for a big exam. After you take your exam, you have a reward, right? There's a celebration, and the celebration at the end of Ramadan is called Eid. And so I have a big sweet tooth, which you're going to hear more about in future times. But this is a saying of the Prophet that Eid, that's the name of the holiday, that comes the day after Ramadan ends, the start of the next month, that these are days of eating, drinking, and the remembrance of God. So this is a picture taken from Damascus, Syria, and we pray for all of the people in oppressed populations around the world. But there's been a horrific and catastrophic civil war going on in Syria for the last 8 years now, and there's no respite in sight. And these are, the Syrian people. I have friends who are Syrian refugees who have just really heart-wrenching tales of escaping. And I don't want to get political on this, but we see just total chaos and madness, right? So we ask God to restore peace and safety to all of the oppressed and damaged peoples of the world. So anyway, this is a vendor selling sweets, because you go there and you buy like sweets and you give them to your neighbors, you give them to like your professor, you get, if you want to be in good graces with your teachers, and you give them, to your family and friends. And then what happens is it's a time of celebration. And so what you're doing is you're preparing. And so this is what you find here. This is sort of an American version of it. You have henna, right? Henna is an ancient practice in many cultures. But, you just sort of all the kids, the night before, the morning of, they're sort of beautifying themselves. You're supposed to wear your nicest clothes because you're going to pray with the community. And then you go and let's continue on. This is what it looks like, right? This is the Eid prayer here. And basically after you pray, it's just everyone's eating, because now you can eat during the daytime, right? So this is another picture from China. This is people doing the Eid prayers in India, in Delhi. And then after that, you just go and it's chai and sweets and kebabs and whatever it is that you want to. And really, it's like you now can celebrate afterward, after you've undergone this experience. And this is what it's like. I mean, it's a day of real communal fellowship and brotherhood and sisterhood. And this picture, like, talk about, we're living in an age of social distancing. So this picture almost strikes us as strange, right, with what we're going through now. And we hope and pray to God that God eases this affliction and tribulation in the world, that we're able to go back and be beyond social distancing and hug and embrace our loved ones and our friends and our family and our neighbors in the best of ways. Just really fun pictures. This is a picture from California. Is that, you dress up, you go to the mosque, people taking selfies, people, sharing on Facebook and Instagram. And this is, and I just end with this picture. So this is a picture of a beautiful family in Bangladesh on the left, and a family, it's so striking. This is a balloon vendor in Kabul, Afghanistan. Right? That just like, I mean, to me, that I look at that, it makes me smile, because it's like, talk about brightening up people's days, that you get a balloon for a child, a stranger perhaps even, right? And to make their day. And then the very last picture of my slideshow is, this is my family. I ask you to keep them in your thoughts and prayers, as I will do with all of your family and your community. And so this is last year's Ramadan. This is at my parents' house in upstate New York. Binghamton, New York is my hometown. And this was us dressing up to go to the mosque. This year, Eid will look very different, to be very honest. The mosques are all closed and shuttered. And so as as I'm sure you felt for Passover or for Easter, is that we were all, celebrating and worshiping in the privacy of our own homes, but maybe through Zoom. And so we pray for better days when we're all able to get together again. So with that, I end my formal presentation. And if you have a little bit of time, I have time. If anyone has any questions or comments, the floor is open. Thank you.
Omar, thank you so much. I just want to pay gratitude towards you, sharing your personal stories and how they intersect with all of the information. You shared so much, and I'm thankful it's recorded so we can visit. And we do have about 6 minutes for questions. I think Juanita.
I put a question in the chat box.
Okay, could you repeat it? I can't see the question right now. If you
okay.
Yep,
so my question, well, it wasn't really a question, it was a statement about how amazing it is that Easter, Passover, and Ramadan all fell in the same month this year.
Indeed.
With the COVID-19, and is that a message to humankind that we're all connected in some way?
I really appreciate the comment. And if you ask me personally, this is not a coincidence, right?
Right.
I'm not going to claim to read the mind of God, as they say, but we look at the signs that God gives us. And I think this is a beautiful sign. I mean, obviously, we're in challenging times, but like, as you rightfully said, that you find these three beautiful celebrations and spiritual times in proximity to each other, is that there's something deeper there. Yep.
Yeah.
Janice, do you have a question or unmuted for any reason?
No, I'm fine. But I'll seize the moment and say thank you so much. In a basic way, you've made me very hungry. It's seeing all the wonderful food. But I think what I just am more mindful of is how important it is to change our routines so that we do notice what we need to notice, and to be aware of something that we often take for granted, be it a spiritual connection, a God, a family, whatever. So I'm grateful for that, and I heard that loud and clear, and I'm taking it to heart, and appreciate the beautiful photos that you have given us, and just the enthusiasm, the energy, the commitment, the love is so there in your voice and in what you said. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
I too want to express my gratitude. It felt especially poignant in this day, in this time, to be gathered like this, and to have you sharing. And I just want to ask, as a person who lives in a country in which Muslims are a minority, how can I best be supportive, and how can I best acknowledge to my Muslim friends this holiday?
Well, thank you. Thank you for your words, and thank you for your thoughts. Really briefly, in the interest of time, what I would say twofold is, one is, I'll put it this way. I've lived my whole life as a minority Muslim, essentially, and I loved hearing when someone, like a non-Muslim friend, neighbor, stranger, said Assalamu alaikum to me, because I felt seen. I was like, they know who I am, they know what I appreciate. And saying Ramadan Mubarak, right, which is sort of the universal Muslim greeting or a celebratory message for Ramadan. So to say that to a Muslim friend or to a Muslim stranger, I think to me, it just brings joy to my heart, because it feels like, this person sees who I am. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that, we're definitely living in challenging times in our, in this period of American history. And you're doing amazing things already by all the work you do with Kirkridge, you and your amazing staff and board, and anyone that's affiliated with it, is that we need to build a coalition of the willing. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, right? We need to like-minded people of faith and conscience, that people that want to stand for the best of humanity, not for the worst of humanity, and to really be there and have each other's backs in this time. I think, irrespective of race, class, gender, ethnicity, lifestyle, whatever it is, we are people that need to look out for each other. And I think you are doing that work. And so God bless you and facilitate all of your work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sally, I think that's a beautiful question, and a question that Kirkridge retreatants, participants, supporters ask often is, how can we be better? How can we advocate and be in solidarity? And Omar, I heard that message as well through your enthusiasm, messages of community building, of kindness, of deep discernment on this journey. And because an hour doesn't do it justice, and that's what we allotted, but it doesn't do it justice, where would you encourage us to go next as allies to our Muslim friends and loved ones? What would be some great resources for us?
Sure. So, I mean, off the top of my head, it's a little tricky. I mean, a little just challenging. But I mean, I know you, and I'm happy to send some resources your way. I think I would like to envision all of us moving like imagine a post-COVID world, right, where we could gather together in physical and spiritual fellowship. And I think that in itself is really beautiful. And then beyond that, it's just, the Quran talks about this idea of gathering the hearts, right? And getting to know each other, to understand and deeply appreciate the differences that God has put between us, of race, of religion, of culture, and to appreciate the difference and respect the differences that we have. And I think that getting to know each other, which is already happening, is that, hopefully we can continue this, after we pass through this difficult time. And mindful of the time, I'll end on this note to say, I look forward to the day where I can have iftar with all of you and invite you into our houses and into our mosques and have iftar and welcome you as special guests so that we can break bread together soon, inshallah, God willing. Thank you.
That'd be great. And Justine, I just think also you recording this, just putting this on the website for Kirkridge and then letting people access what we just experienced would be also a great way of sharing what Omar has just shared with us.
Absolutely, Juanita. So as we conclude, I'll stop recording, and my hope is to share this widely. It was amazing.
Thank you.
I think we're so blessed to be in this space for the last hour, especially with Omar's enthusiasm, passion, and knowledge. I'm grateful. You are definitely a friend of Kirkridge, of course. And I'm also grateful for Farina for expanding our circles and inviting Kirkridge in and Omar in to make this happen. And I think this is, again, just another step on that journey. We will continue to learn and understand and engage. And so thank you everyone for participating, asking questions, and being so attentive. And again, thank you, Omar. This was wonderful. Thank you for your time leading up to this in conversation and spending your time with us and sharing and learning and knowing. We are so fortunate to know you. So thank you.
Likewise.
Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Beautiful note to end on.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum and good night.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for putting this together.
You're very welcome.